The 460th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Good! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome in to another live edition of the Four Corners podcast here on a Monday night. We're inside 24 hours away from the next time we see Carolina on the court when they take on number 7 Florida in the Jumpman Invitational in a game that starts a big week for the Heels. It's a week that if Carolina sweeps, we feel a whole lot better about where we are going into the holiday break. If Carolina splits, depending on how we look, we could still feel very encouraged about where we're going. But if Carolina were to lose both of these games, I do think it would really call into question what this team will look like when they come back after Christmas and getting into conference play. But we got to take it one game at a time. And the first game up is the number 7 Florida Gators, and we're here to preview that. We'll tell you everything you need to know about Florida. Look at this game from the Carolina perspective. Have a discussion topic that focuses around this game, this event, and how it's very similar to the circumstances a year ago for Carolina. And then, of course, we'll give our keys to the game and pick the game. But first things first, as we do in every preview edition of the show, we do the pod thought of the day. And we used Bill Belichick last week. And it led to a Carolina victory. So I figured we'd go back to the well again and use him for this pod thought ahead of a big game for Carolina. And this pod thought goes as follows, quote, "It's not all about talent. It's about dependability, consistency, and being able to improve. If you work hard and you're coachable and you understand what you need to do, you can improve," end quote. You look at what we saw on the court on Saturday in the blowout victory over LaSalle, and you saw clear, definite improvement. And it was evidence of something that we've heard from Hubert Davis in the media. He hasn't said anything bad about this team publicly. He's made it known how much he's loved this team. He loves being around them, how coachable they have been. A few years ago, when Carolina was going through a very struggling season when they started preseason number 1 and then ultimately missed the tournament, you could tell that Hubert Davis and that team did not click. He did not talk very glowingly about them publicly. And we know all the reporting from that year where that was just a group that was ready for that season to be over with. Carolina has, endured their fair share of struggles early on to start the year. But Hubert Davis has remained positive. He's remained optimistic. He's remained upbeat about their potential moving forward. And we know this group has a lot of talent. This is a very gifted roster from top to bottom, but if you're not dependable, if you're not consistent, and you're not coachable, none of that matters. And I think this group is. We saw that on Saturday, and that's setting the scene for a really big week for Carolina, one that if they can find a way to take these next two games, that might be the best Christmas gift we get all Christmas season if we're Carolina basketball fans.
Yeah, and look, there's not going to be a lot of quad one opportunities. And I know that people are going to say, are we really saying this at this point in the season? But, I mean, we learned it last year, man, especially for some of these teams in the ACC. It gets late pretty quick on teams in the ACC. And believe it or not, this year might be the worst that the ACC has ever been. I don't think last night or this weekend's loss by Clemson to Memphis is a bad one, but it's another game that kind of shows that there are not going to be a lot of opportunities in this conference, especially when Carolina is hosting games at home. Like, you got to remember, there are no neutral site games once you get to conference play. So those quad one opportunities really shrink. You got to hope that you get certain teams on the road. And so it feels big for Carolina, man. This week, I think you'd really love to take both games. And the reason why you would is because, yes, the more difficult game is in a place that you would think you would have a lot of success. Even the game against UCLA, that's in the Garden. UCLA has a fan base that does span the country, especially some of the older fans. But Carolina, we've seen it. They have put some really good crowds in Madison Square Garden. But still, the one in Charlotte, that's in your backyard. It will be a pro-Tar Heel crowd. So that's one where you really got to find a way, it feels like, to get this one against Florida. Because if you can find a way to get those two wins, I'm not going to say it completely erases everything that happened in Maui. It doesn't completely erase the fact that you lost at home to Alabama, especially in the players' minds, because they really wanted to win that one. But it would do a lot towards boosting your tournament resume, which at this point has started to become pretty important for Carolina as they get ready to go into what should be for them an easier conference slate than we thought even coming into the season.
Let's go ahead and dive right into the Florida preview and look at the Gators up close and personal. They bring into this game with them a 10-0 record. They are now up to 7th in the AP poll. They've got 3 wins against ACC opponents, having already beaten Florida State, Wake Forest, and Virginia. Them, like the whole entire SEC conference they've enjoyed their fair share of success over the ACC in the non-conference portion of the year. They have 4 players that average double-figure scoring, led by Walter Clayton Jr.'s 19.1 points, 3.2 rebounds, 3.6 assists. He's shooting 48% from the field, 38% from 3. Elijah Martin, the second leading scorer for them, 15.2 points, 6.3 rebounds, 3.1 assists. He's shooting 47% from the field, 37% from 3. Alex Condon, their third leading scorer, 12.2 points, 7.1 rebounds, 1.6 assists. He's shooting 55% from the field, 46% from 3. And then Will Richard, the last guy in double-figure scoring, 12 points, 5.3 rebounds, 2.1 assists, shooting 42% from the field, 25% from 3. They average 86.2 points per game. That's top 20 in the country nationally. And they average over 43 rebounds per game, the 7th highest mark in all of college basketball. If you look at Florida and you look at the way that they play, the style of offense that they run, and then what their numbers would suggest, this is a throwback Roy Williams-esque style of team where they are old. They got 3 veteran guards in the backcourt. They'll play with 2 bigs simultaneously, and they like to run. So this is a group that plays a fun brand of basketball, a up-tempo brand of basketball. They've got a ton of experience. They've got a ton of size, and they're going to pose a big challenge for Carolina tomorrow night in more ways than one. And the Heels will have to find a way to combat one of the better, most explosive all-around teams they've played so far this season.
Yeah, and it's a team that honestly lines up with some of the teams that they've played already. Earlier in the season, if you would have told me that they would be just as good as Auburn, just as good as Alabama, I would have laughed at you and said, really? This Florida team? I thought they had a chance to be good. I thought they had a chance to make the tournament and probably be around where they were last year. But I'm going to tell you, Walter Clayton Jr. has taken that next step. You've also got a guy in Elijah Martin that name should ring a bell because he's a guy that transferred in from Florida Atlantic, was on that team that made a deep run a few years ago and was a key contributor. And then they've got a big man that is really successful. And that's always been when Florida has been at their best, is when they've got a big man that can make a difference inside. And that's Condon, 6'11", 230 pounds on the interior. And he's averaging 7.1 rebounds per game. So you may think, okay, well, he's rebounding well, but he's not exactly dominating. The reason why is because there's so many different guys that can rebound on this team. Now, the interesting thing about them, and in watching some of their games, I haven't watched a full game of theirs through, but definitely watched some of their game against Wake Forest, and also saw them against Wichita State. That one got to so quickly became a blowout that eventually you were just like, man, I got to turn this off and find another game during that feast week that was a little bit better. But the thing about them is they don't play a lot of guys. They play 8, but every guy that they bring on the floor seems to be effective. So Carolina's got to be prepared for a team that is incredibly talented, is incredibly motivated, I think, to prove that they are one of the best teams in the SEC this year, despite not getting talked about the way that Auburn, Alabama, and Kentucky are getting talked about. And a team that, may not be as deep as Carolina, but has guys that might be a little more effective off the bench, or at least a little more consistently effective off the bench, game in and game out.
Well, one of the reasons why they haven't been talked about like some of the other teams is just simply that's how good the SEC is.
Yep.
The SEC might be the best basketball conference we've ever seen. There's a legitimate shot they break the record and put 12 teams in the tournament next March. That's how good the league is. And so it's hard for every team to get the love that they all deserve. But make no mistake, with them being now ranked inside the top 10, especially if they beat Carolina tomorrow night in Carolina's backyard, this will be a team that when you listen to podcasts and you watch college basketball shows, that will get talk about a team that could make a Final Four. Don't know, maybe in a national championship might be a stretch too far, but this is certainly a group, depending on what happens with the future around their head coach, who has some off-the-court issues, that if that all kind of stays together, that is a group that could very well make it deep into the NCAA tournament, which is why for Carolina, this would be a significant marquee victory that could really spring forward them into really having the type of season that we hoped we were going to have upon entering the year as a preseason top 10 team. You look at the game from Carolina's perspective, they bring with them a 6-4 record. They are 1-2 on neutral floors so far this year, of course. All that action coming in the Maui Invitational. This is the 4th game already that Carolina has played a top 10 opponent in so far this year, which just is mind-blowing to think about the fact that that's right now officially over a third of their schedule to this point. And when they take the court on Saturday for their 12th game, that won't be a top 10 team, but that will be another ranked opponent that Carolina will be going up against in the UCLA Bruins. Like Florida, Carolina has 4 players averaging double-figure scoring, led by the All-American R.J. Davis, 17.6 points per game, 4 rebounds, 4.3 assists, despite shooting just 35% from the field, 25% from 3. Seth Trimble is the second leading scorer, 15.4 points, 4.7 rebounds, 1.8 assists. He's shooting 52% from the field, 45% from 3. Elliot Cadeau, the third leading scorer, 11.5 points, 3.7 rebounds, 5.6 assists. He's shooting 44% from the field and 26% from behind the 3-point line. And then the freshman Ian Jackson, the last double-digit score, 10.8 points, 3 rebounds, 0.8 assists, shooting 46% from the field, 44% from three. And Carolina averages 86.8 points per game. That's the best right now in all of ACC basketball. The thing for Carolina is they're coming off their best performance of the season in the blowout win over LaSalle, where Kay Tyson had his best game as a Tar Heel, scoring over 20 points, making more three-pointers in that game alone than in all the previous games he had made from that three-point line combined. And they're going to be tasked and challenged with really trying to build their first legitimate bit of success and momentum. The one thing this team has not really done so far this year is build off of one performance to another. And a big reason why has been the schedule. When you've played at Kansas the second game of the year, and then you played the 3 teams you played in Maui back to back to back, and then you come back and you play a top 10 Alabama team, Carolina's non-conference schedule has not allowed them to build off of blowout wins because they haven't had a lot of them. But they had one on Saturday, and they'll look to build off of that tomorrow night against a top 10 team in Charlotte.
Yeah, and the thing you want to see carry over is what they've done on the defensive end of the floor the last 2 games. I was kind of shocked when I looked on social media last night and we saw some people talking about the performance that Carolina had against LaSalle, basically saying that they didn't like the way that Carolina performed defensively. That doesn't really make sense to me. I think the last 2 games you've seen a much more locked-in team on the defensive end of the floor, a team that's been a lot more active. And if anything, the guards have done their job. They've stayed in front of guys. They put more pressure on the ball. And so I hope that's something that we see carry over into this game, because this is going to be what challenges you the most in this game are their guards. Yes, Condon is a really good player, but if you can't slow down Clayton Jr. and Elijah Martin, then there's no chance that you're going to be able to win this game. So Carolina's got to be locked in this one. To me, it's if Condon has, a pretty big game, I wouldn't say let him go Janai Broom on you. But if he has, a decent game, kind of matches his numbers, I think you can live with that as long as you are taking away their most effective scorers on the perimeter. So I think that's one thing that you want to see start on that end. And then carrying over from what we saw the other day offensively, I want to see this team continue to set effective screens, and I want to see this team finish at the basket, because they were really, really good the other day on layups and dunks. Amazingly, that has been a massive issue for this team throughout this season, and it's honestly been even worse than in years past. And we thought that some of the guys that Carolina brought in, this group of guards getting older, we thought these guys would be able to finish at a pretty high level after they've had some issues with that the last few years. That certainly has not been the case. But the other day, you look, they were 21 of 26 at the rim. The only shots that they missed were 5 layups. That's much better from them, and that's hopefully something that you see carry over into this game, because if you get easy looks at the basket, you've got to be able to make them against a team that's as good offensively and defensively as Florida is.
All right, let's get to the discussion topic around this game. You go back to a year ago when Carolina was playing in the Jumpman Invitational. They played an undefeated top 10 team in the Oklahoma Sooners. Carolina would win that game, and that would really signify the launching point for that group. That was the turning point. That's where all the players said it all came together. Even though I came on this same podcast and said, hey, we won the game, but we got out rebounded, didn't shoot the ball well. I was still a little bit more hesitant before completely buying in to what that team became, which was an ACC regular season champ and a team that would earn the 1 seed or a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. You look at this game and this event this year, Carolina is facing an undefeated top 10 team. And if Carolina were to get a victory, it would be their most significant win so far of the season that you could look at and hope would carry over into another big game on Saturday. And if Carolina was to go on and even finish, let's say, top 2 in the league and earn a respectable seed in the tournament, we would all look back at this game as being the reason why. So is this just a coincidence, and are you getting a deja vu feeling around this team going into tomorrow night's game?
Man, I want to feel like that. I will say that I do think that this is a better team that they're facing. I know Oklahoma was undefeated when they faced them last year, but we saw that team drop off as the year went along. And when you look at this Florida team, I don't think this team's going anywhere. I think this team is legitimately one of the best teams in the country on both ends of the floor. So I think it's a tougher test for Carolina. But would it shock me if this is the turning point of this season? No, because one of the things that we've talked about with this group is that there hasn't been a chance for them to really get in a rhythm. Yeah, you had Maui, but that was a tournament where you wonder if they had faced, let's say they faced Iowa State. Let's say Iowa State found a way to hold on and beat Auburn. Maybe Carolina matches up better with them, and it allows Carolina to find a way to win that game. I think you could have been talking about a much different outlook here, if they're able to go and win the final, even if they don't, just having that win over Iowa State, who knows what happens in that game against Alabama. I feel like that stretch, you had a chance to gain momentum, but it really became something that hurt you because this was a group that lost their confidence. This is one of those games, though, where you just blew out LaSalle. You did what you had to do against that team. You finally got off to a good start out of the gate. Even though you were down 8-2 early in the game, you responded very quickly, took the lead, and led by double digits most of the way in that first half where you were finally comfortable. So that's really the first time this year this team has been able to say that. And so you wonder, does that carry over into this game? I think there's a good chance that it does, especially because it's such a short turnaround. Just 3 days later, it's still pretty close to home. You don't have to travel, via airplane or whatever. I think they'll probably just bust them down here. So I think, honestly, with it also being like a home environment, I feel like this could really be that turning point. And yeah, it'd be pretty amazing if this is the game that we look back on. Some of us may look back on the LaSalle game, depending on, how you look at the season. But if they find a way to win this game, this is probably the one that you point to and say, this is what turned the season. And that could be a reason why Hubert Davis, I know he's thinking about potentially getting out of the multi-team events around Thanksgiving, but I got to tell you, he shouldn't be looking to get out of the Jumpman Invitational, especially if this is the turning point of this season too.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to stress is that this is a better team in Florida than what Oklahoma was a year ago. Yeah. That top 10 Oklahoma team did not make the NCAA tournament last year. That was how significant the drop-off ultimately became for the Sooners. I don't see that happening with this Florida team unless something were to happen with their head coach and the legal trouble that he's facing off the court. And which, look, that investigation is still ongoing. That is still very much on the table. But even at that, with as old as this group is, as experienced as this group is, they could still maybe find a way to overcome it. So Carolina is going to have their work cut out for them. When I was talking after the LaSalle game, the biggest thing I stressed was don't look at the opponent. Look at the way that Carolina played. That was the best Carolina had played. From start to finish, that was to as close to 40 minutes as a game this group has played. They competed on both ends of the floor. They're finding ways to rebound the ball despite their lack of size. They didn't shoot the ball well from the outside, but they made a number of 3-pointers to make up for it. Like, it was all, in all intents and purposes, the best game they've played so far this year. Well, in this game, the opponent matters, and how Carolina plays against the opponent matters because, at some point, if this team is going to have the look in the feel of a tournament team, you've got to beat somebody good. And right now, your best win is over Dayton. And that Dayton win looks fantastic. That Dayton Flyer team beat UConn in the Maui Invitational. And in case you haven't noticed, UConn's back to being UConn. And Dayton also beat Marquette over the weekend, too, a team that has aspirations of going to a Final Four. But you got to have more than just one win. You can't just have a win over Dayton to hold your hat on and be able to really make people believe in you. Because you've got two big games this week, and then you've got a handful of big games in the ACC. You play Duke twice, you'll play Clemson, you'll play Pittsburgh, you'll play some other quality games in the league that we got to believe that you can win those games. And so if Carolina goes out tomorrow night, competes the way they're capable of, they play to their talent level, and they find a way to win, then our thoughts and feelings, emotion around this team can change completely. Because they would have a significant marquee win in addition to the Dayton game that they can hang their hat on. The thing is this is not going to be a game where you can fall behind as many as 21, 22 points early in the second half and expect to come back. Florida has got just as much offensive firepower as you have. Their size could overwhelm you. And so Carolina is going to have to really play their best and most complete game of the season to find a way to beat Florida tomorrow night in the Jumpman Invitational. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the all-important keys to the game for that Carolina victory. The first thing I wrote down, it was kind of similar to the Alabama game, is you got to win the race to 80. With the way that both teams score, Carolina could play high-level defense and give up points tomorrow night because the pace is going to allow such a thing. It's going to have a March Madness type of feel to it because both teams rely and depend so much on their guards. You look at Clayton Jr., that's a guy that if Carolina isn't careful with, he can score 30 and do so in a quick manner. I feel like for Carolina, if they're going to win this game, this feels like an R.J. Davis game where his fingerprints are all over this game, where he's the best player on the floor, he's controlling the offense, he's toying with the defense, and scoring at all three levels, getting to the rim and finishing, getting to the foul line, and then making perimeter shots. But he's going to need Seth Trimble to be aggressive Seth Trimble and be looking to force the issue and get into the rim. You're going to need positive Elliot Cadeau, where he's not a turnover issue and he can run the offense as orchestrated. And then Ian Jackson's got to be Ian Jackson. He's got to give them those easy buckets that he can provide and be able to stretch the defense and hit shots from the perimeter. So both teams score a lot of points. We expect a lot of points. I think the first team to 80, led by their guards, will have the best chance to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that, you look at Florida, the games that they've had success, it's because their offense has really been able to get in a rhythm early in the game and establish early leads. So this is going to be a big test for Carolina in that respect. Really, on that end of the floor, you just need a good shooting night. We have been begging this team to have a good shooting night across the board. All three guards potentially locked in and making shots. And we just haven't really been able to get that. Seth Trimble, I think, has been the most consistent force for you scoring-wise. But, yeah, you'd like to see him carry that throughout the entire game. The other day against LaSalle gets off to a good start, but becomes a little quiet as the game goes along. You're right. I think the most important guy to have in a rhythm in this game is R.J. Davis. And for some reason this year, it just has not clicked for him. He's shooting 35% from the field overall, 25% from three. Like, those are numbers that just have to get better. And hopefully this is the game where you can start to see those things turn around for him. And then, yeah, when it comes to Elliot Cadeau, it's really all about how efficient is he? Is he turning the ball over? Or does it look like the other day where, hey, even if he isn't necessarily scoring at a high rate, you'd like to see him score more than 4 points. But as long as he is sharing the basketball and getting the ball moving, that's ultimately what you need to see from this team, because we've talked about it. coming into the other day against LaSalle, Carolina's offense was pretty stagnant. There wasn't a lot of ball movement. The ball would stay on one side of the court in a lot of possessions, and it would result in tough shots. You want to see them moving the football around and finding those open guys, making that extra pass that Hubert Davis talked about the other day, because if they do that, there's a chance that this offense can get back to the type of production that we saw earlier in the season. I mean, this was a team out of the gate we thought might be one of the highest scoring Carolina teams that we've ever seen. And, it started to sort of go downhill a little bit, especially in that game, against Alabama. And then you saw how ugly things got against Georgia Tech. I hope that the other day against LaSalle, that's what gets this offense back in a rhythm and allows them to sort of turn this into maybe, a little bit of a track meet if they have to with Florida.
Second key to the game, it should not surprise you, Carolina has to compete on the glass, and they'll have their work cut out with them with the way that Florida rebounds the ball. They're top 10 in the country nationally, and they've got as much size as Carolina's going to have to deal with 1 through 5. And we've seen Carolina struggle with teams that have a legitimate big man. You look at Kansas, you look at Auburn, and then Clifford Amore had his dunk fest in Chapel Hill in the ACC SEC Challenge, but this is a big Florida roster top to bottom. And so it's really going to be imperative that Carolina gang rebounds. And I think that's something that they've done a really good job of early on in the season. You look at the rebounding averages of RJ and Trimble. They both averaged four rebounds or more a game. Elliot Cadeau right around 4. And they're going to have to be a big part of what Carolina does on the glass. You're going to need Van Allen Lubin to stay out of foul trouble because he is Carolina's best 5-man right now. And he does give you the best chance. But I think I think you're asking too much to have them out rebound Florida. This team I don't think is built to do such a thing, but they got to compete. And by that, I mean, I think if they lose the rebounding margin by 5 or less, I think they can win the game. But if this is a game where Carolina gets overwhelmed on the glass and they get out rebounded by double digits, I don't think that's a good thing for this group. They got to be able to limit offensive rebounds for the opponent while also getting to the offensive glass and scoring those second chance points. So, I'm not asking them to win the rebounding battle, but I'm asking them to compete. And if they make it close, it's something that can help them pull. It's not an upset because Carolina is actually favored to win the game, but it would go a long way to helping Carolina win the game tomorrow night.
I mean, look, Carolina comes into this game unranked. Florida is. I would call it probably an upset. And when it comes to this area of the game, that would be huge just if Carolina could find a way to hold their own. Because you look at the size that Florida has. They start Alex Condon. They start him at the 4. And then you've got Ruben Chinyalu, who they start at center. So they're going to have 2 6'11" guys starting the game for them. I'm interested to see how Carolina counters that. I would not be shocked if you see if they do stick with Van Allen Lubin. I would not be shocked in this game because of how big that starting lineup is. If Hubert Davis decides to start Jalen Withers, who is 6'9", can provide just a little bit more length out there than Drake Powell, who would be a 6'6" guy having to guard in the post against a 6'11" guy. So this is going to challenge Carolina a lot. But you're right. This is where you have to buy in as a full team rebounding wise. You have to crash the glass. You have to be aggressive because that's how Florida plays too. I mentioned it earlier that they don't have a guy that has more than 7.1 rebounds per game so far this year, but they've got so many different guys that can rebound for them. That's the mindset that Carolina has to bring into this game as well. And we've seen it a little bit here in these last few games where Seth Trimble has had a pretty good amount of rebounds for a guard. Same thing with RJ Davis. He's been getting involved as a rebounder. Ian Jackson the other day, 7 rebounds for him. So while he wasn't necessarily as effective on the offensive end as he had been in previous games, he steps up in that area of the game. So I think that's what you're hoping for Carolina in this game. Even if you lose the rebounding margin, just find a way to keep it close, maybe create more offensive rebounds with a guy like Vin Allen Lubin, finish those second chance points, and that could be the difference ultimately in this game.
All right, the last key to the game, I really got two of them because in a game like this, these areas or this area of the game is going to be magnified, and it's something that if Carolina struggles, we'll talk about at length in the recap edition on Wednesday. The first thing is they have to limit their turnovers. Again, you look at Carolina in ranked competition. You look at why they've struggled, why they've fallen behind double digits, not just in the game altogether, but rather quickly, is because they give the ball away and just give free bucket after free bucket, and then they dig themselves a hole. So that's the first thing. I think there's going to be a high number of possessions. So if you turn it over 10 to 12 times from a possession standpoint, it might not kill you. But this can't be a game where Carolina coughs it up 15 or more. It starts with Elliot Cadeau just being sure of himself, valuing the basketball. Remember, Hubert said on Saturday, every possession counts. Every possession matters. Let's treat each possession as such. And then I think you've really got to capitalize on your foul shots. If you can score with the clock stop and get into their bench and make them get into their depth. First off, it helps you win that race to 80. The best way to score and be efficient is when the clock isn't moving. But, you look at Carolina in their big games, also when they've lost. What's been the one thing? Outside of the Michigan State game, they just didn't get to the foul line a whole lot. And they weren't as aggressive as you would have liked for them to be. And this was a group that in the first 3 weeks of the year was top 10 in the country in terms of made free throws per game and free throws attempted per game. You got to get back to that. It starts with the mindset of getting downhill, putting pressure on the rim, but inviting the contact, not shying away from it, and trying to make plays through. If you go in there out of control and you just throw it up, they're not going to bail you out the foul call every single time. And then when you get there, you have to convert. So, the special teams, as I like to call them, the little areas, they really show up in big games like this. Carolina has to limit their turnovers and then be efficient from the foul line to really put themselves to have an opportunity to win this game.
Yeah, it's become one of the most important things for Carolina, really, when you look at it. This is a team that, I think it's like up to 6-7 straight games where they've had double-digit turnovers. And what's stunning is before they went out to Hawaii, they were one of the best teams in the country at holding on to the basketball. But something happened out there. And now Carolina likes to turn it over at a high rate. You saw the other day, though, that when they did turn it over, it was turnovers that weren't exactly killers. And Carolina was able to get back in transition and defend. So while they did have 11 turnovers, they allowed just 5 points off of those turnovers. Where some of the games earlier in the season, Carolina was turning the ball over at an incredibly high rate. You just go back to the Georgia Tech game. They had 18 turnovers in that game. That was something that, we saw in the exhibition against Memphis, but we thought was kind of cured early in the season. So this is one of those games. Florida's a really good defensive team. Carolina's got to be careful in this game, but it all starts with Elliot Cadeau. He has to be locked in this game, because if he is, then Carolina has a real chance to win this one if he's efficiently passing the basketball. If not, and they're constantly turning it over, especially early, that's where Florida can sort of get out to an early lead. And once they put Carolina behind, this is a really difficult team to come back on. So I think that's the most important thing, more than anything. Turning the ball over, especially, in close games, sometimes it's going to happen when teams are competing at that high a level. You just can't come out and turn the ball over at an incredibly high rate in the first half and put yourself behind, forcing you to have to fight back. So I think that's really important. And then you mentioned, capitalize at the foul line. That's another key to this team this season. when we've seen this team at their best, it's because they're getting to the foul line at least 20 times a game and they're making their foul shots. The other day, you said it, a lot of it was that some of the bigs were getting to the foul line and not making their shots. This team still shot below 50% from the foul line the other day. That cannot happen in this game. Even if the bigs are getting to the foul line, this is a game where you need them to be able to make those shots there. So hopefully Carolina's guards are aggressive. They're the ones that are drawing the fouls, which allow Carolina to convert there. But most importantly, you want to see this team being able to get there, because that's been one thing that's helped them this year when they've had some of those shooting struggles, is just finding a way to get to the line and get those easy points. I'm hoping that they get a better shooting night, but with what we've seen so far this year, it's hard to be confident that Carolina is going to come out and just burn it up in this game against a really, really good Florida team.
Carolina enters the game with a 50.2% chance to win, according to ESPN's Basketball Power Index, which is why I said they are the favorite going in. Yes, from a ranking standpoint, this would be an upset, but the analytics would actually favor Carolina to win this game. I'll let you go first. Who wins the game and why?
Ooh, man. This one's tough because Florida is a really good basketball team, but I think Carolina's a really desperate basketball team. I feel like they probably know. And I mean, maybe this is something that Hubert Davis has communicated. Maybe it's not. I think they know that this is one of those games that you kind of need with the conference schedule that you have coming up. And so you're in, I don't know, would you call it a second home? It's probably pretty close to it. They've had a lot of success here in Charlotte. You're going to have a big, big home crowd behind you here. I would expect Spectrum Center to be pretty packed for this one. And so I feel like with the home crowd behind them, with a motivated group coming out to try to prove that they are still a team that can make some noise this season and that they are starting to turn it around, I think Carolina finds a way to come out with the victory against Florida. It's going to be a close game. There's no doubt about that. Florida's too good of a team for Carolina to come out and blow them out. But I think Carolina finds a way to get it done in this game and take down the number 7 team in the country.
Yeah, look, this is going to be I think it's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be a war. I think whichever team wins the game will have earned the victory, literally and figuratively. They'll walk away with some battle scars, with some scar tissue. I think, there's no denying how good Florida is. I mentioned they are a group viable, good enough to make the Final Four. And it's going to be really fun to see kind of where their season goes the rest of the way, because it's the first time in quite some time that they've got legitimate expectations around that program. This game's in Carolina's backyard. There's going to be a heavy contingent of Carolina fans in the building. We've seen it both years of the Jumpman Invitational. And then this fan base knows how big this game is for this team. And if they can be a small part in helping them secure a victory, what it would do for them, in the weeks to come. I think Carolina turned a corner last Saturday at home against LaSalle. I think you're going to get more out of your role players because their roles are more defined and they're just getting more comfortable playing with one another. And I believe R.J. Davis is too good to play this bad for too long. And I think number 4 looks like what I believe he is, the best guard in the country. I think he outduels Walter Clayton Jr. I think Carolina wins a fun, high-scoring affair tomorrow night in the Spectrum Center to earn their most significant win so far of the 2024-2025 season. No matter what happens, we'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com, where the site continues to boom and prosper. A lot more news coming out on the football side of things. Bill Belichick landed his first recruit out of the transfer portal earlier today. He made his first hire as he's putting together his player personnel department. And Carolina has scheduled other visits with some of the top transfer portal targets as well. All that coverage can be found, all that information and insight can be found on the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. I'll be getting you ready for the Florida game tomorrow. Preview always goes up day of the game, and the recap will be posted tomorrow night as well. Right now, guys, we just encourage you to visit the website daily, at this point hourly. There's something going up. It feels like every other hour, whether it's around Carolina basketball or Tar Heel football. So make sure you visit the website. It's HeelToughBlog.com for the latest and the best Carolina basketball, Tar Heel football coverage. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball season. Well, with that, guys, this is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.